Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Java class. So, once again, we are back onto NetBeans. Um, we're going to be using NetBeans like 99% of the time because CodingBat is like the one thing that we kind of used other than NetBeans, and that is very, best way I can put it, circumstantial, simply because, well, it's like it's only for like certain topics, and we're gonna go into CodingBat in a lot more detail later on in this course after I've taught you more about the basics of Python. And once we kind of can finish, or sorry, Java, once we kind of finish that sort of review, then we can go back and touch on that. But for now, we do still need to finish up the idea of code reuse. So in case you guys don't remember what happened last class, I'll go ahead and give you guys like a 5-minute recap of what happened. So we went ahead and we kind of went back into, a new file right here. We started a new one, it's line 1, right? And so you'll notice we have a bunch of these lines here. I can go ahead and delete all of this pretty much. But what's happening here is we went ahead and we wrote our very first method. This is what is basically some basic knowledge that you need to know if you ever want to do CodingBat, right? Because all of your information present in your in your CodingBat thing can be represented like this power function right here. Every single one of the methods starts like this. Now, I only went ahead and gave you guys one example of this, so it's not exactly something that's encapsulating quite yet, so you guys probably are still going to be lost if you go ahead and try out the CodingBat yourselves right now. It's important that you go over multiple of these examples, and I will go ahead and show you exactly how and why, some better examples that we can go over, and things like that. So first of all, it's important to understand that code reuse is all around you. In a lot of the applications you use, if you play video games, if you watch YouTube, if you watch Netflix, if you use a calculator, all of these are reusing a piece of code. Now you're probably like, wait, how in the world does a calculator reuse code? Well, if you think about it, if you are adding, two numbers on a calculator, you're doing like 1 plus 1, you get 2, right? If I'm to do 2 plus 2, technically that's reusing the backline of the code inside the calculator. We want to go more complicated, we can do things like cosine, sine, tangent. You probably at this point don't exactly know what that is, but it's like fancy math functions. And you got to do calculations to get it, and only the calculator exactly knows how to find it, right? And so essentially these are all using something called a method, right? Or a function, whatever you want to call this. This is important to remember because you're going to be using it over and over and over again. So, as I'm saying that's important, let's go ahead and, try another one, right? So at this point, I want you guys, no matter what happens, for every single one of your methods to be started with public static. In my programming experience myself, I only moved away from public static like 6 months in, and this is like programming every single day for 6 months, like schoolwork, that kind of stuff, programming competitions, all that kind of stuff. There was no need for me to move away from static because I never had to access from another file really, and you aren't going to either. We're going to stick with this basic Java because the syntax is probably the hardest part to learn, especially if you had no experience in Java either, right? So now is our third word, keyword, right? Our third word highlighted in blue, and this one is going to be our return type. So this time we're going to say our return type is going to be a string, and you're going to be like, wait, this is not blue, right? Well, that's because this is a special type of return type. It's not your basic ones. So this is where it's important to go back into our knowledge of variables and think about, all right, what are the two different types of variables? You probably don't remember this. If you do, that's really impressive. If you don't, that's perfectly fine. It is going to be your more basic ones are primitive and your non-primitive, right? Or I don't know what else you want to call them, but we'll just call them non-primitive for now, right? Your primitive versus non-primitive variables. Primitives is like single values, like short values. That's the best way I can put it, because you don't really understand what's going on in the back end of things, so it's not really easy for me to explain that to you. But it's essentially things like it's like integers, floats. Your decimals is what float is. That kind of stuff. Characters, right? Very short compared to things like a string. Now, a string is different because it has functions. And by functions, I mean kind of like you can do things with a string that you can't do with like an integer. Right? So if we go ahead and, we try and familiarize ourselves with how in the world, what in the world I'm even talking about, we can go ahead and move over to Google, all right? And we can just search up Java string functions. Now, you'll notice that there's a lot of websites that's going to pop up. However, there's only one and only one, right? This is the only website that is official, the Oracle Docs, okay? Very important that you understand this, because the Oracle Docs is going to be like the official website. If you have any other questions, anything like that, you come here. Does that mean that explains it the best? No. It's probably one of the worst explanations that you can find for every single method. Simply put, it's like a dictionary, like when you read the definitions of a dictionary, many times you won't understand what it is, but it kind of gives you an idea. Like if you don't know if like you really understood this completely, then you can like kind of check up with it. That's what this is for. And so you'll notice right here, there's a lot of things you have to read. First of all, you might be a little confused here. It says class string. So I haven't introduced the idea of class yet, but it is like a higher level of code reuse, meaning that it's like even more complicated than a method. And we'll get to that in a second. And if you look back at the code that we have in NetBeans, you'll notice that this piece of code is in fact going to be like encapsulated by a class, because that's just how Java works. You can't exactly make it operate in any other way. Now, next thing we want to know is, alright, well, first of all, I should probably explain what exactly is this class string, right? So this means that there can be multiple methods pertaining to a string, and that also means that I can make objects out of a string. I'm introducing a lot of technical terms here. I don't expect you to remember any of these terms. I just want you to see if this kind of makes sense to you. The classes is not something that we're going to touch on for a little bit. I want to move on to coding that first, because classes, although it's the basis of Java and what makes Java Java, it is also going to be a abstract concept that I found myself to be one of the most complicated parts about Java. Up until probably like 6 months in, again, like 6-8 months, I never really dealt with the class aspect of the of Java. So basically, it's not relevant to you right now. Okay, but that doesn't mean you can ignore it. All right. So now we want to go down here, and it says a lot of these things. This is not entirely important right now because it's higher level stuff. This is talking about, what a string is, what you can do to a string. Strings are going to be, string buffers, first of all, are mutable. All right. And mutable just means changeable. Programming tends to be very technical. The jargon in it is very strict, and if you don't understand all the jargon, you're going to be quite lost. All right, mutable and immutable mean you can change it, right? You can mutate it, or you cannot mutate it, or it's immutable. So now we introduce all this kind of stuff, and we introduce the idea of this basic operator, which is like adding two strings together, like hello and world to become hello world. And now we go ahead, we come into this field summary. Not really something you need to know. Okay. We come here, and this is a constructor summary. A constructor is kind of like, you're at a construction site. You can't just put together a building on the spot, right? You have to get the materials together. That's what your constructors are. Your constructor, you'll notice, always starts with string because that's the class or object, whatever you want to call it, name, right? And then you have all these, tidbits here, right? Every single constructor has these two parentheses. And inside the parentheses, you can have any combination of variables. All right, these are your inputs. This is like you're in a calculator. You want to do 1 plus 1. You can't just have plus, right? You need to have two numbers. These two numbers are your inputs. These two numbers are going to be in your constructor. They're going to be in the form int a, comma, int b. So you notice that each one has two words in it. And two words because one is the type, one is the name. Again, this touches upon the variable scope a little bit, meaning that you can only access this variable inside the method. For now, you don't really need to know that. Just kind of treat each method like a mini file. Your method can't be touched outside, right? You can't access anything inside the method outside of it. The only thing you can do is you can call them. So now we come here and we see all these things, right? First of all, method summary. Method summary, I'll give you guys a chance to look at this and see if you can identify any patterns here, is going to be what makes a string a non-primitive type. So I'll give you guys about 2 to 3 minutes to just soak in what I just said, and then I will go ahead and explain what this means, and we'll go back to our code. So 2 to 3 minutes to just kind of look through all of these. I don't expect you to understand most of them, but they should at least make sense. At least I would hope. And then I'm going to go over a couple of these methods, and I'm also going to go over what exactly modifier and type mean and what method and description mean. Alright, so it's been about 2 or 3 minutes, so now I'm going to go over what exactly is in here. So first thing we want to look at is our modifier and type, right? So this is going to be essentially explaining what type you're dealing with here, right? Well, you're always dealing with a string because that's the inherent definition of method summary. You're always going to be dealing with a string. However, this is going to be what you're returning basically, right? So what this means, so this one says character, right? Or car for short. And over here it says car at int index. So 4 words here, or 3 words. Well, I mean 3, 4. I don't know. I count Carat as 2, but I guess it's just a name, so it's 3. But Carat is going to be your method name. You'll notice that your method names are not going to be as consistent as your constructor parameters, right? The things inside the parentheses. Because, I mean, to be honest, you can name your methods anything. As long as you know what's going on, it's fine. But obviously, Java made this so, or the developers of Java made this, so they want to make it as professional as possible. So they try to make their methods make sense. I would try to make your methods make sense for your own sake, because obviously you want to be able to understand what's going on. But, you know, other than that, you can have unprofessional method names. Do not have spaces. This is programming. Spaces will kill your program and make you have errors you do not understand, unless they're inside quotations in a string. Alright, that's the only exception. Now, back to here, we have Carat, which is the method name, and then we have our constructor, right? Int index is going to be what's inside it, right? Or not constructor, parameters. Alright, these parameters, again, 2 words, type and name. Int is going to be your type of the variable, and index is going to be the name. You'll notice that these two have the same 2 parameters, int index, right? But these two are completely different variables. Now, if you don't understand programming, like, or if you haven't seen the implementation of the code, you're probably pretty confused right now, because you're like, wait, don't these two have the exact same name? Treat it like this. Every single time you create a method with a new, you know, method name and all that kind of stuff, every single time it's like, you know, it's like there's a new baby being born into the world, you know, and their name is Bob, right? And there can be multiple Bobs in the world, right? And that doesn't mean that they're the same person. That just means that they are different instances of someone with the same name, right? That's the best analogy I can put it. Other than that, I mean, I don't really know how to put that into better words. So if you have any other questions on that, just ask me specifically, like through email or something like that, and I'll respond. I can respond it in the next class, or I'll respond by email. Alright, so now we see, alright, we have the description. So the description is Oracle's attempt at telling you what this method is going to do. In this case, it says returns the char value at the specified index. So essentially what this means, you know, a bunch of jargon here, right? It's like you have a word, say hello. Your indexes is going to be the position of each character in the word. H is position 0, because in programming we start at 0. E is 1, L is 2, blah, 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 right? Now, returns the char value. You're like, wait, what char value? I know what a character is. I don't know what a character value is. Well, it means the same thing. Character value just means the character there. So if I say char at 0 of hello, then that's going to return H. On top of that, even though I inserted a string into this method, it is not going to return a string back. It is going to return your type. Okay? Very, very important. So at this point, we kind of understand what the Oracle is saying, like very briefly. I mean, obviously not in too much detail, because there's a lot of methods in here, and I don't even know all of them myself personally, because you're only going to need, you know, like 15 of these probably. Most importantly being length. You're going to use that a lot, all right? If you do programming, that is, right? So now that we've kind of discussed exactly what this means, you don't need to know what this method means specifically. It's just the example. But basically, if you have any questions on if there's a method, you can go ahead and just Google, like, is there a method for finding the exact index of a character in a string. a very, very specific question. There is 2, 3 websites or groups of websites that I'd say are good. First of all is Oracle, right? You can see it by, I don't know, their website logo. It's going to always be docs.oracle.com, and it's going to explain to you exactly what's going on here. Second one is Stack Overflow. If any one of you has used things like Reddit, like Quora, you will understand what this upvote system is. It essentially means that when you see something that's good, you upvote it, right? That means that you approve of it. So when other people come around, they just want to check it. They'll see, oh wow, this looks reliable. Some 300 people like this one. So that most likely means that it's correct, right? So I'm just going to read this over and try and see if I can understand it. This is like the comment section right here. Comments, like the YouTube comment section, right? It is like likes, dislikes essentially, except I don't think you can go negative. You might be able to actually. Yeah, but essentially you always want to go with the most popular one. Unless you don't understand it, then you would go down into the comments to see if you kind of do. I don't recommend commenting yourself unless you actually can't find an answer, in which case it might not exist. Or maybe you should try something yourself. This is all like the very basic parts, alright? And your final one is going to be things like Geeks for Geeks, which is a relatively trusted programming learning website where it has basically the descriptions of a lot of these kind of methods here. All this kind of stuff. And this is actually a cool instance where we see the caret function again, and instead of int index, it has int index number, which kind of shows like it doesn't matter what you name this, as long as it is defined as an integer, it will work. And I mean, your final one is going to be W3 schools, or We Schools, right? And this is pretty much all. Those are the only websites you will ever need. Higher up, you will start using GitHub. Yeah, there's no GitHub on here, is there? Yeah. I would not trust anything else, unless it's like a professional college website or something like that. So now that we've kind of gone over this, we can come back to our code, and I will give you guys like 1 minute to absorb what I just said. Alright, we come back here. Alright. So 1 minute to kind of absorb what I just said before we go ahead and move on. Alright, so now that we've kind of established this, we can start writing our second method. And now we're going to be returning a string. In this case, we are going to be, it's going to be called add hello. That is going to be the name of it. Alright, and we need a string to start out with, and it needs to be base string. That's what we're going to call it. So inside of our base string, we now need to make sure we return something, right? Well, what are we going to return? We can't just return our base string right back, right? How are we going to do that? Well, our method description is called add hello. What does this mean? Well, we're adding hello to whatever there is. So our base string, we're actually going to create a final string. It's going to be called string final, and it's going to be called base plus the string hello. And We're gonna add a space because I don't like combining words. Actually, you know what? It'll be fine, right? And we have our semicolon there, and then we need to return final. And I'll go over how to shorten this in a second. Shortening code, by the way, is almost always good, unless you're in Java. In certain situations only, do not take my word for that, because it's all very situational. But in that case, you do want to do it. So we do our same procedure. We call the method name, and then we have to give the parameter, and this parameter is going to be, say, goodbye. It has to be in a string form. Goodbye. Alright, so in this case, I can go ahead and run. And you can see it says goodbye hello. It added hello to the end. Once again, 2-3 minutes to go over what I just wrote, and I'm going to go ahead and explain all of it. Alright, so hopefully you kind of understand what's going on here now. So now we can go ahead and shorten this. So you'll notice that I have defining final and returning final in the same line, meaning that we don't actually need to define final at all. It is called an intermediate step. Intermediate steps are good when you are still trying to think out your logic. See, I run it again and you'll notice that it will have the exact same output. Goodbye, hello. Right, and I can literally copy this exact same thing, right? And instead of having to do this, I can just say, you know, hello, hello instead by doing this, and it'll say hello, hello, right? So with this, it's kind of like a, I don't know, a conclusion. You know, it's like basic methods that we're writing right now. I'm going to go into detail, and we're going to go over our final examples next week, and then we're going to probably move on to CodingBat, or I might introduce you to a couple more concepts. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them right now. If you do not, then I will see you guys next week. Thank you everyone for watching, and